Today, I have Kate Ferguson with me, who is going to share her story from science fair competitor to plant whisperer with Flourish Plant. It's a company that's revolutionizing plant care with organic solutions and top tier educational content. Now, to put it simply, and as Kate says, I love this, you don't like a hangry plant. And I think that is so cute. And so Kate and her childhood friend, rooted back years ago, got together and at some point decided they were going to create this business. And so we're going to talk about a lot of things here, not just your typical advice. We're going to dive deep into how these childhood friends turned their passion into a flourishing plant business. So welcome, Kate. I'm so happy to have you. And I know this couldn't have been easy. So I appreciate you coming on and giving us some insights into how you got all this started.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me, Bonnie.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I see your entire house has plants everywhere. So I'd love to understand one or two things about your favorite plants.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got a few behind me. You've got a beautiful pothos right here, a
Ooh.
rubber tree back here, fiddle leaf fig, a little philodendron. My favorite plant is not in the behind me right now, but it's actually a night blooming cereus. It's in the cactus family, and it's been passed down was passed down originally from my grandfather to my dad, and then I ended up with a cutting, and it's now pretty robust. So it's the plant I'm holding in my headshot.
That
So it's kind of a cool one just because it's been in the family for several generations. Growing up, I have a great story. When we were little, night blooming cereus generally bloom at night in the summertime. And so when we were little, I'm one of three girls that when the night blooming cereus were blooming, we got to stay up late and wait for them to bloom that evening. And some years we'd have like 10 or 15 blooms on this beautiful cactus that my dad cared for. And so, yeah, it's just a cool plant to have. And it's got a little family tie. And I have a lot of fond memories of it when I was little.
well, that's crazy. I can't imagine having a plant that has gone from generation to generation. So you're saying you've had this since your grandpa was alive or further?
Yeah. Yeah. So my grandfather had a night blooming cereus that then was split, and my parents ended up with a portion of it. And then a couple years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I took a bunch of cuttings, and cactuses are fairly easy to propagate, which is something that's really cool about them. And now a couple years later, it's growing. I wish I had it with me. It's right over there. It's not mature enough to bloom yet. Maybe 2 or 3 more years, and I'll get my first bloom. But it's a very cool plant, and it's fun to see because I remember it on my grandparents' patio, and now my
Um,
parents.
that's lovely. And,
Yeah,
just those sorts of memories and connections. So you started out at a very young age, it sounds like, with connecting to plants, which is a good thing. I mean, some
definitely.
of us are great. Like myself, I just really have no luck. So it's wonderful to see someone that kind of actually has a passion for it. And there's an emotional tie to it and can turn that into a lifelong dream. Before we get there, I want to just mention we have a sponsor, Costa Farms, who does a very amazing job with plants. And I want to kind of showcase that one a little bit. Maybe you can tell
Yeah.
me a bit about that particular one.
Yeah, absolutely. So looks like this might be one of their new varieties of pothos. It's beautiful. Costa does an amazing job with their cultivation programs, and they're really one of the leaders in the horticultural industry. And so they've also just been great friends and mentors to me and my co-founder as well. So it's just been really cool to get to know the Costa team. There's a lot of innovation, both on the horticultural front, so like new plant varieties, but then also, they're doing innovative things with like self-watering, and they're one of the best. I mean, you can find their products online. They're a great company, and we've been really lucky to get to work with their team, and members of their team have been great, really great mentors and advisors to Lila and I.
Well, what's interesting is that I've learned over the last year or two, you're seeing a lot of different brands come out where you're
Yeah.
actually able to buy a plant brand. Now, growing up and even over the last several years, if I buy a plant, I may not necessarily know the name of the plant. And now it's becoming a very customizable, personalized experience. What is your thought about that? I mean, I guess that it's in some respects has helped fuel your own business.
Absolutely. I think the reputation of different growers, like the quality of the plant that you're bringing home when you're bringing home a Costa Farms plant. So I think that there being name ID and reputation associated with these different plants and these different varieties is a really cool thing for consumers, especially as they're thinking about you know in our world, it's all about, who you really want high quality plants. You want plants that are going to be pest free. For us in the fertilizer space, and then also in the plant care space, you want products that have efficacy and sustainability at their core. And so I think being able to associate brands with amendments and then also with the plants themselves now is a really cool opportunity for consumers to understand, like, who are the players out there, and who can they trust, and who should they shop from. So I think Costa's done an amazing job of really creating a wonderful and robust brand around their incredible offerings. I mean, they've been around, their legacy brand as far as growers go in the space. So they've been around for a long time. They know what they're doing. And so you know what you're getting when you're buying a Costa Farms plant.
So let me go back to your business a bit and understanding, where did you, again, you're a little girl kind of, I guess, doing science fairs with your friend. Did you dream at some point that you would create this type of business that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been pretty inclined towards the natural world, spent a lot of time outside in the dirt as a child. But the real
Picking
impetus
up the caterpillars and the worms, or no, the plants
yes,
probably.
yes, caterpillars and the worms and the plants, a little bit of everything. Was never afraid to have dirt under my nails. But the real impetus for Flourish came from going back to my dad, actually. I was a student at the University of Texas at Austin, and I had plants because I grew up around plants and kind of assumed that everyone had plants. And I too struggled to keep my plants alive. I mean, it is a labor of love. It is something that is, I think, in a lot of ways, a learned experience, how to care for plants, how to keep them alive. And so I remember calling my dad up, maybe my freshman or sophomore year, and saying, my plants look terrible. Like, what's the solution here?
But some beer's probably been thrown in there at some point.
Probably, yes.
Who knows what happens?
Most definitely. And so, and he was like, well, go out and buy some fertilizer. I was like,
okay.
oh, and it just felt like this, like, I had never considered it before. Never. I mean, I'd been around plants my whole life. My parents had fertilized their plants, fertilized their gardens, fertilized their indoor plants. I had never considered it. And so when I started to look into it, it kind of felt like this, like, big secret that, like, a certain cohort of people all knew that they could go out and buy, like, a pretty well-known brand name, and they would grab it at their local Home Depot or even on the shelves of their local grocery stores, and they'd grab this product and then they'd use it, and then their plants, I mean, a miracle would happen. It was the craziest thing.
And you would notice that miracle. You'd be like, okay, my plant's not doing well. I put something on it, and the next day it's like, oh my gosh, it's like back to life.
Exactly. So we felt like this was this, like, great, this big secret. And when it came to kind of the next generation of plant parents, which were me and my co-founder and a lot of my dear friends.
Plant parents. That's great. I love that. Yeah. Sounds good. Plant mom and dad, grandma. So you think about it, right? You had a grandfather who was a plant parent, and then passed it down generation after generation. So who knows?
Absolutely.
That's a great story. I love that.
So yeah, we felt like there was just like this opportunity to offer the next generation of customers something that met their standards. And so when we were looking at, like, what we could buy on the market, a lot of the plant amendments and fertilizers were more oriented towards an outdoor consumer. And so we wanted a natural, organic, and extremely effective product. But those natural and organic products were better suited for outdoors. They generally had a really, really strong smell. If you were to bring them in your home, you'd be airing your house out for a couple of days. And so we were like, where is this? There's seems to be this problem that we could solve for, where we could bring a really high quality organic product that was well suited for indoors. And maybe you were living in a city. Maybe you didn't need a gallon dilution, and you just had 4 or 5 plants, and you wanted a cup or 2 cups of fertilizer to use across all your plants. So we then sort of set out and we created Flourish, which is the name of my company. So we make an organic, all-purpose houseplant fertilizer out of upcycled food waste. And it's a super easy product to use. I mean, it's a liquid concentrate. You can feed almost 100 plants with this little bottle. Just dilute this concentrate into as little as 8 ounces of water, and you use it across your houseplants. It's really foolproof.
Okay, so that's interesting. As an entrepreneur, you see a problem, and the problem is, I get it. Like, I've had a bit, like, bringing, like, potting soil or something to add to my plant. It's smelly. It smells like, when you do the mulch outside. I'm like, it's dirty. It's a lot of stuff going on in your fingers, right? And you say, okay, instead of that, maybe it's sort of like you have those little flavored water things that you put into water bottles. That's what that kind of reminds me of that. You kind of mix it all together, and it's the organic side that was interesting because I would imagine, did you have any sort of issues with shelf life or how long does it last? Is it different than that whole concept? And I imagine this is where the science fair comes in.
Yeah.
So tell me about the experimenting you had to do to get to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lila and I being very motivated by science. So we both competed on the somewhat regional and national science fair circuit in high school. We both participated in a 3-year program that was offered by our high school. We both had different projects just in the natural world. But efficacy has always been really core to who we are at Flourish. So, and I think that just roots back to our science fair days is that, an effective product is the most important thing. And at the end of the day, it can be beautiful, it can smell great, but at the end of the day, it has to keep your plants alive, right? That's the goal here.
Yeah, the goal, that's the goal, right? And so I imagine a lot of testing, a lot of,
yes,
right, research,
testing,
whatever.
We brought on a scientific advisor super early in the business days, and that was really to help us meet all standards around sustainability and efficacy. So when we were vetting suppliers, when we were working on our formulation, we wanted to make sure that we had the highest quality product that could be available, that also met all of our sustainability guidelines. And that was really in the early days of building the business, I think so much is about, who do you surround yourself with? So who are those key advisors that first come on? And one of our first key advisors was a scientific advisor, because we knew that while we both studied the sciences in high school and my co-founder was a biology major in undergrad, neither of us had advanced degrees in sciences. And while we knew the importance of, adhering to the scientific method and things like that, we wanted someone with the credentials that could really speak to, the fact that we were checking all the boxes here and really looking for a product that with rigorous testing was going to be the highest quality product out on the market.
Well, that does two things for you, right? It gives you some credibility, but it also, I'd imagine in some respects, it's an investment, but it's going to save you some money on the flip side. So let's talk about it a little bit. I mean, when people are starting, and this is me, and I have like my side hustles that I love to do for passion, but, to actually take that full dive. And I actually had Kara Golden on, who was the founder of Hint Water, and she had sort of like a science experiment in her kitchen before going out. But it reminds me, to market, it reminds me a little bit about what you're talking about, bringing in people, kind of testing, making sure that it's the highest quality. That is not for the faint of heart, because that is a process and an investment. And it's not that fun at the time, right? I mean, I'd be thinking about what's the packaging going to look like? How am I going to market it? But this is the crux and the most important part of you making your business together. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you bring up a really good point. Like there's all these fun, shiny things you do in the beginning, and then there's all this hard work that you do in the beginning. And it's the hard work that's like much more sustaining. And the initial like branding and things like that, like those are the things that like in the beginning feel like are very passion oriented and a lot of fun, but they happen kind of like one time in a vacuum. I mean, obviously there's ongoing marketing efforts, but at the end of the day, like you're still running a business. And so like the things that the infrastructure you put in place, like the challenges of like getting things off the ground are like the things that are going to end up sustaining the business in the long term. And they're also going to be the things that you end up spending the most time on. So for example, our product is a heavily regulated product. I spend hours and hours every month on regulatory reports. So just pulling reports for different regulatory agencies, because our product is registered in all 50 states independently. So being able to get the label through approvals in all of these states and then provide, monthly, quarterly, or annual tonnage reporting, I do in conjunction with our regulatory agency. So, that's what I spend a lot of time doing. I'm not doing package redesigns or putting together like massive marketing campaigns all that often, but I am doing regulatory every single month without fail. Same way I'm doing accounting or all the other sort of facets that are so core to the business, just moving forward. And I think that that's something that is probably not talked about enough, is that like at the end of the day, the core business functions are what you're going to spend 80% of your time doing. In fact, I'd rather hire people to do the fun stuff, because it's like, it's going to be passion oriented and fun for them. And at the end of the day, I know that, making sure that the bottom line looks good and that we're doing the right things to move the ball forward and to help generate, revenue and growth are like, checking the boxes and making sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And so that's a lot of what I spend my day doing. But at the end of the day, my co-founder and I feel very strongly about like the value that we derive from like building this thing and seeing it through. And so you end up starting to enjoy those details because you know that those are the things that are keeping, the solid foundation or like the house around you like together and up. And I think that being able to see the beauty and the joy in those elements of the business actually can become really rewarding in the long term, even though it's not the fun stuff that I started and loved in the very beginning of the business.
No, so you brought up, there's so much to unpack there, but the one thing I want to kind of go back and kind of tell our audience a little bit is that you went into this business with a friend. So it was a friend from you've known very, a long time ago, and you're talking about some very heavy lifting there. And to make sure that you get another person that is aligned with you to go on that long haul is
Definitely.
very difficult to find. So I want to ask a little bit about that. What you're talking about, I think, is the make or break in most entrepreneurial scenarios. You know what's kind of involved. You are looking at the things that are going to move the needle. So important. It sounds like you both are aligned there. So let's talk about how that works as a partner who's a friend.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. We say building with your best friend is definitely an interesting experience. I actually have a mentor in the space that also works with a childhood best friend. So I think having a mentor that I'm able to call on in like the great moments and even in the challenging moments, who's also done that, is really advantageous. Because it's never easy to build with someone that you know so well, but it also has incredible perks and upsides to it. And I think that the foundation of your relationship being friends first has been both a huge advantage and then also at times like a huge challenge. So Lila and I have known each other since we were, in middle school. And when I first had the idea for Flourish, she was truly the first person that came to mind.
Were you in college together or separate colleges?
Separate colleges. I was down in Texas. She was up in upstate New York at a school called Colgate University.
And I know Colgate.
Yeah.
My daughter was in the soccer tour. We actually visited that school. I mean, it really is very remote, but what a cool little campus.
Such a great place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
plants out there.
Definitely. No, not a lot. Yeah, it's a little barren out there. In the winters at least. It's beautiful in the spring and the summer.
Right.
But yeah, so she was really the first person that came to mind. She was like my initial gut instinct. And I think as a founder, you do learn to trust your gut. Like your gut is going to be right and it's going to be wrong, but it's what you've got. And so you have to learn how to trust it. And so and even when you trust it and maybe it's wrong, you still learn something, I think, too. But with that, she was my initial instinct. I brought the idea to her. And then not too many months later, we were kind of like moving ahead with Flourish. And I chose her and I thought of her and she was the first person that came to mind because I am a very ideas oriented person. But the difference between an idea existing in my mind and existing out in the world, like those are two completely different things. Lots of things exist in my mind and very few of them exist out in the world. And so I knew I needed someone that was very execution oriented, that was like a go-getter, that could run after things like without fear. Because that wasn't me. Like I would spend a lot of time in my head thinking through and testing different hypotheses and testing little things. And she would just be like, let's just try. And so it was that yin and yang.
Yeah, you need that little push.
Yeah, that push that made me feel that Lila was like the perfect person for Flourish to get off the ground with.
Where do you get this maturity, though? And I'm questioning, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 30.
All right. Where do you get, I'm just trying to understand, this concept came about 9 years ago?
Yeah. So yeah, 8 or 9 years ago.
Where did you have that emotional maturity or just maturity in general to understand that you needed someone like that, the right sort of push, because you were able to understand that you have a lot of ideas, but bringing that idea to market is a totally different ballgame. And you kind of knew, you know what, if I want to kick this ball forward, I need someone that's going to maybe, bring the second half of me to make this thing go forward. How did you know that so young?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually goes a little bit back to that gut, that intuition or like that instinct almost, because I wouldn't necessarily say that I had some, like wise I mean, perhaps like some of the mentors and people that I was surrounded myself with, like, I was surrounded by from a young age. Like, I had really brilliant people around me. My grandfather was brilliant. My parents are
Your
brilliant.
grandmom, you said?
My grandparents were both brilliant.
That's
My
awesome.
grandfather, I spent a lot of time with, the one who had the original plant.
He'd be so
But
proud, wouldn't he? Is he still alive?
he's not. He's
Oh,
not.
he would be so proud.
But I have a lot of fond memories of building things with him, and he sort of indulged my every curiosity as a child, and I think that was something that probably lent itself to who I am today. Is that, I would say I want to make this, and he would like drop the plans for it. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think back then it was probably more of a gut instinct, but I think that what I've learned is in reflecting back on like some of the decisions that I made just based off of instinct or based off of a feeling back then have proven to be um, wise decisions in the long term. And so in reflecting back, I'm able to see like this is where that puzzle, I didn't even necessarily know that this was a puzzle piece that was going to come together, but it really has, and this is why. And I think being able to reflect back on decisions that you've made and learn from them, whether you learn that like I made the right decision or I will change course on the next, or if I give someone some advice, I might share that like I made this decision with the information that I have now, I might have made a slightly different one. I think that's a lot of how I approach like life and how I think about the business and how I think about growing and learning from the business. So even going back to like, I don't necessarily know that as a 23-year-old or so, I knew that like Lila was going to be this perfect complement for these
No,
exact
you don't
reasons.
know, right? You had an
But
instinct and you
but I had
followed.
an instinct. And then now, as I reflect back on like a lot of the reasons why we work so well together, why we've been able to advance the business and our products only have been on the market for 3 years and we're in over 250 Whole Foods.
Okay, so
And
let's talk. All
so,
right, this is I've got like a million things I want to ask you. One thing I want to touch on before I go forward is every single successful entrepreneur to date that I've spoken to talks about the importance of being curious. The curiosity is really what drove them. So that is also something I'm going to be just putting somewhere in my mental memory forever because I think that's a very important attribute. But let's go back to it took you how many years to get this product to market? 5, 6, 7?
yeah, so we worked on the product for probably about 3 to 4 years before bringing the product to market. So, and that was, a combination of different things. It wasn't all just scientific testing for 3 to 4 years. It was figuring out some of the nuances around regulatory. It was understanding the product landscape, where we really felt we could be successful and understanding who our customer was. So there's so much that goes into building a product-based business and making sure that you do it in a way that's sustainable at the outset, that you are, you've well positioned yourself based off of the set of circumstances that you're in. I often like to when I talk to other founders that are just getting started, I will caution all of my advice with you're being handed a set of circumstances that is so different than the set of circumstances that I was handed because
Yeah.
like no two people are the same. No two
No.
businesses, like they don't exist in a vacuum, so the amount of funding that you start with or your job and your situation, like your work situation, whether you're able to go full time immediately, or there's so many different environments in which like people start businesses, and so no two set of environments are going to be the same. And so the circumstances that led to Flourish getting started look so different from so many different other businesses. But I do think that for us, the set of circumstances that enabled us to get started was just a real passion and a drive. My co-founder was really able to jump in, head first on the business. And we were also getting started at kind of an interesting time with COVID. So like our jobs sort of enabled like this little like additional hours in the day when we weren't going into offices anymore. And so there was just a very unique
A unique scenario
environment.
that I think you're smart to point that out, that every business story and trajectory is different. But now that you have this wisdom, and I don't know if you've ever worked in a corporate environment or not, perhaps you did. What would you recommend in certain people who are wanting to start something? Go cold and just go for your dream, or you know what, kind of put your toe in the water and make sure you have revenue coming in. I think it may depend on the person's mentality. Like, I don't know if I could just go cold and say, I'm all in, here you go, I'm going to go, $50,000 in debt. Well, let's hope it all works out. What are you finding, or what would you recommend to people who want to start a business?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I honestly think I think that there is validity in doing it both ways.
Yeah.
I think testing and refining and maintaining some sense of stability and security if you can is is a great way to do things, but it also like presents its own challenges. So I
Well,
think that like it's harder to jump all the way in. It's harder. You might be missing out on opportunities or not fully jumping into the risks and therefore like hamstringing yourself a little bit in the process. But you also like are giving yourself maybe the breathing room of still taking a paycheck or some of
well,
the other
yeah.
things that like might be required in order to for you to be able to do something. Um, for me, it was sort of an interesting combination of I was ready to make a change and then I sort of jumped and I was pushed a little off the cliff.
You
I
push.
Lila pushed, I would say. She looked at me one day and said, "You're never gonna really, we're never gonna get this really going unless you get all in. So you're gonna need to like do that like soon." And
Were
I
you
was like,
scared?
"Okay." No, I think yes, absolutely. It's scary, but the minute I jumped, I knew I would swim. And I think so going back to like when you were saying like kind of the undercurrents you hear amongst a lot of entrepreneurs is curiosity. I think the
Yes.
other one that I feel like is an undercurrent of a lot of the entrepreneurs that I admire and who have advised me and who I just look up to is also just not necessarily a love of solving a specific problem, but just a love of solving problems in general. So if you love to if a problem looks more exciting, like problems are exciting to you because it means you get to solve them,
Yes.
then
Finding that
I
opportunity
think
to
you're well suited to be an entrepreneur. And I
yeah.
think that going back to that idea of like jumping off, like all that meant is that I needed to make sure like the minute I jumped off, I was like, oh, okay, now I just got to swim.
Right.
It's like,
And I'm going to
okay,
swim really
this,
hard. And I'm going to
yeah,
right, look and know where I'm going. Right. I mean, you can't,
right,
shark might come get you. You don't know that. But for the most
right,
part, you're
yeah,
going to go from point A to point B and you'll have some waves in between. But you were
right.
determined to get that other side. So when do you along this journey start feeling like, I want to know the high and the
Yeah.
low until you kind of are where you are today?
Yeah, I would say the high is like is in the beginning, the little wins are all really big wins because it's the first time your product has been like I can remember the first plant store that ever picked us up. It was a plant store in Dallas, the Plant Project, and we got on a Zoom call and we had this long sales pitch and she agreed. Our friend Brie agreed to carry Flourish. And so when that happened, and she wasn't our she we didn't know her at the time, but she
Oh,
agreed to
she's your
carry
friend
Flourish.
now, but before
She's
that,
our
you
friend now, yeah.
kind of
But so
outreach.
yeah, and so the very first plant store we ever launched in, or the first month of e-com sales, those wins were huge in like relative to where the business was. As you grow with the business, wins now that are huge wins relative to signing on our first independent store, they don't feel quite as big anymore. And so I think that it becomes a challenge because in the beginning, I
The
think
harness. Yeah.
you're very good at celebrating the wins because it's so exciting, it's novel, it's new. I think as you continue on in the business, you have good days and you have bad days and you have challenging moments and the problems, with great risk comes great responsibility with, the bigger you are, the bigger your problems are going to be. You know what I mean? So I think that those challenges just they scale with the business basically. And so the scary moments are scarier. Um, but the wins are also bigger.
Well,
And I
yeah.
think that navigating that new normal as the business grows is a challenge, honestly. But I think that if you can take the time to reflect, if you can surround yourself with people that have done it before you, that have charted paths, um, somewhat similar to yours that have scaled businesses, grown businesses, it helps to remind you that like what you're feeling is not novel, like they felt that same way. And I think that just doing anything for the first time or experiencing something for the first time, can feel kind of isolating or can feel like challenging. And then, if you surround yourself with a strong community of other entrepreneurs and people, you have these conversations and you realize like, oh, this is so normal to feel, or, oh, you
I think you're
experience this
right.
as well.
But can you share how many no's you got until you got that first yes?
Oh, absolutely. Tons and tons of no's.
Tons
I
and
mean,
tons.
tons and
You're
tons.
not everybody. It's not easy. So
No.
tons and tons, but that passion and the belief that you had something that was going to be helpful and solve a problem, that kept you going. So you're saying dozens, hundreds?
I mean, no's in all sorts of facets of the business. I mean, we had no's from tons and tons of plant boutiques that said, oh no, we're not going to carry your product. Like you don't have a track record.
I know,
So we
right?
had lots.
What comes right? It's hard, but you got to
Yeah.
start somewhere.
Exactly. We heard no's from people that were gonna, we had approached some investors. We heard tons and tons of no's there. We heard no's from partners in manufacturing because we couldn't meet MOQs. I mean, it is a string of no's, and then you get the yes, and then you move forward, and then you've solved that problem. But I think that that's like going back to that problem solving is that like, as long as you're like, you have to find a solution. So the problem isn't the crazy part. I mean, if you have people to ask, then you're on your way to a yes. You know what I mean? Like it's
That's a
the
great
problem
way
is
of
when
looking
you
at it. That's a
the
great way of looking at it.
yeah. So the problem is when you run out of people to ask, when you run out of ideas for solutions. Because as long as you keep running at a problem and trying different types of solutions, eventually one will work.
Well, okay. So what's the hardest thing? We talked about some of your biggest, most exciting win is your first kind of plant store that someone's going to
Yeah.
carry Flourish. What was one of the hardest things or one of the hardest snacks along the way?
Yeah, I think that there were moments where we felt that we were running at something that was maybe not the right thing. So having invested time, energy, dollars into something, and then realizing that the strategy that you have in place is actually maybe not the right strategy. And so having to just say like, all right, well, we learned a lot, but like, we got to kind of cut our losses and we got to pivot. And I think it's very hard to pivot because you're admitting you're wrong. You're admitting that a hypothesis that you thought that you were testing or something that you believe to be true is actually not true. And I think that reflecting and realizing that is like a really hard thing in the business. And I think it's your ego that kind of gets in the way, and your ego will always get in the way throughout business. Like it doesn't matter what it is, but it's like, that is when things feel the hardest, is when your ego gets involved. And so, it can be a challenge with like a channel strategy or like something that's very like specific to the business, or it can be like just admitting you've made a mistake and then having to pivot. And I think those are the hardest moments, like when you're
yeah. And I think one of the things you and I chatted about before we came on is that, I don't know if it's inherent in women. I don't know if it's inherent just in human beings. We're always looking for that external validation. And
Right.
I loved how you explained to me, at first you start out for this external validation. Before you know it, you've proven enough to yourself that you can do it, that validation is now intrinsic.
Yeah.
Did I say that right? Is that kind of what
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I think when I first started Flourish, it was a lot about proving it to other people. It was about proving, Lila and I felt like we had something to prove to the people that had supported us, the people that had raised us, not because they weren't always very supportive, but just they were betting on us. And so it was like, we felt like, oh, like we have to, make them proud and things like that. And that never goes away. You never don't want to make your friends and your family proud. But I think that what happened fairly quickly for me, at least, was this feeling of, okay, I've done it. So I don't have anything I have to prove. But instead I want to build this thing. And that like shift for me, I think really helped to, advance the business and advance how I approached the business. It advanced how I thought about the business. And having that internal motivation to get up every day and to drive it forward, I think it became a lot more rewarding. It became a lot less about everyone around me and more so about me and our company and our team and the people that, it became more rewarding for me, I think, in a lot of ways.
It's a beautiful thing. I mean, that's all anybody would ever want in anything that you do, right? Is to, and I think you've learned a lot at a very young age to be able to know that you probably can go through a lot in life and be just quite okay. So I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you, a little bit with respect to where Flourish is now. Tell me a little bit about size, the scope, the stores, kind of
Yeah.
state of this unique product.
Yeah, absolutely. So this will be March of this year will be 3 years since our product launch. And we started primarily as a D2C online business. We've since grown to over 600 stores across the nation in some
Physical stores.
major, yeah,
Physical.
physical stores.
Oh
So
my
not
gosh.
not our own Flourish stores, but we have our product in
Got it.
over
And over
600
600 stores.
stores.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So we're super, super thrilled about that. We had great partners as we've grown. We've worked with lots of incredible independent plant stores and feel like we've gotten to come along on the ride of small businesses, Main Street businesses that are offering an incredible service in their community. And then also, you can find us in like I said, a little over 250 Whole Foods stores
Whole Foods,
down
love
the
it.
down the East Coast and across to
Whole Foods.
Texas.
Yeah,
And
that's
so we feel really grateful for the opportunity to grow with a chain that we feel value aligned to, a
yeah,
natural and
absolutely.
natural a store that prioritizes organic and high quality products. And so we've been really lucky. And then we've also just had incredible mentors along the way. I mean, from the buyers that our buyer at Whole Foods to Mari with the Costa Farms team. I mean, we just have been
Great mentors,
have
which is
had great
important.
women that have charted the path in the
That's amazing.
horticultural
Love that.
industry, that have really shown us the way and shown us, ways in which we can grow the business. And so, we're really excited for these next couple of years on what we really have going up. We have more products that are coming to market, which we're really excited about. We're also eager to grow from the indoors out, maybe teasing a little something that's in our future,
Good for
but
you.
continuing to offer the highest quality products for people that are, cultivating green spaces and really like want to see beauty in their homes and want to get their hands dirty, and whatever that looks like, or I really appreciated the opportunity to grow up around living things. And so I think that people having the opportunity to be successful at caring for things in their home is like a really cool thing. You can drive a lot of joy from it. And so, helping people to realize that joy of, seeing their plants flourish is something that we're really eager to continue to offer.
Well, I love it. I love actually your story. I think it's very interesting. And I think it's very interesting through the eyes of someone who I think you're right as well. Through the pandemic, people are spending more time at home. I do think that people are becoming, there's just so much more at their fingertips for them to be able to care for a plant. So that kind of brings me up to my final question. I always love to leave our listeners with bits of advice. And because it's you, I need to ask two separate sets of questions. I think one's probably for me. What are 3 quick tips for people who don't know how to take care of plants and everything always dies like me? Just 3 very quick, simple tips they can put into place today.
Totally. So I like to preach something called intuitive plant care, which sounds way more complex than it is. And it just means that if you look at your plant, it will generally tell you a lot more if you just pay a little bit of attention to it. So are the leaves facing down versus facing up? Just try and pay attention to the cues that the plant is giving you. And that will give you a lot of information. If you
It's
just
number 1.
just glance at it once a day, and you'll see changes in the plant, and those types of changes. And as you pay attention over time, you'll start to gather a little bit more knowledge on, okay, I think it looks happier versus I think it doesn't look quite as happy. And just all of those little tiny data points over time will just make you much more in tune with what the plant needs. I will say a lot of people, especially beginner plant parents, tend to overwater their plants. That tends to be, from what
Overwatering is one of
we
the
find, is
okay.
overwatering tends to be one of the number one culprits of people struggling with their plants. So maybe pull back. I'm not saying there are tons of underwaterers out there too, so this is
But you
not
find
great
more
advice.
offenders are the overwaters.
But I find that overwaters tend to be more offenders.
Okay.
And then lastly, I would say utilize the tools that like are, that you have. Like, so every plant needs three things. They need water, they need sunlight, and then they do need some nutrition. So how they get that nutrition can be a fertilizer. We recommend utilizing a fertilizer. We do think it's a great hack to keeping your plants alive. They can also derive nutrition from their soil, even trace macro and micronutrients in their water. So as long as they're getting some nutrition, they need sunlight. So the more sunlight, the better. As you can see, I have a decent amount of sunlight in my house, which is going to make things a lot easier. I would say the last thing, and I know I'm giving kind of like a lot of tips at this point, but
he's very passionate and it's okay.
You set yourself up for success. Start with plants that are going to lead to success. Start with a pothos. Start with a philodendron, maybe a monstera. Start with a snake plant. These are plants that are going to be fairly easy to care for. Once you start to see success with this plant, it's going to build confidence to be able to go out and get something a little bit more challenging. And find a plant that's well suited to your environment. You moderate light, get a plant that's suited for moderate light. If you have a lot of bright light, you can get some plants that are better suited for bright light. If you have low light, get a plant that's suited for low light. Then you're going to be successful. You can't, a plant is a living thing. It won't work in all environments. So if you pick the right plant that's best suited for the environment, you're going to have more success. And if you start with an easier plant, you're going to have more success.
Okay. And then let's pivot a little bit just to, I think one of the things that I've heard, kind of in chatting today, you've gone into business with, someone that's a very good friend. I want to leave folks who are in a similar situation and they're contemplating, do I get into a business with someone that I know or not? Give me 3 pieces of advice you'd give to anyone who's looking to start a business with a partner that they know.
Absolutely. So I'd recommend it personally. I've had a great experience overall. Lila and I are still dear friends, but it's not without its challenges. So I would say, buckle up and get ready for the challenges of a relationship, because a business partnership, a friendship, these are all different types of relationships. So you've got to be willing to work on it. You've got to be willing to solve problems. I mean, I highly recommend Lila and I at different times throughout the business have brought on an executive coach when we're going through challenging, things with regard to, making changes within the business structure or things like that. Like, you have to run at your problems the same way you run at the problems in the business. You have to run at the problems in your relationship as like co-founders, as partners, with, solutions, and open mind, a desire for things to work. And so I think that if you have that mentality, you have that positivity, you bring that desire for things to be successful to your business partnership, then, you really can navigate the challenges, the ups and downs of any relationship. And so I just would advise that, you also want to go into business with someone that has that same eagerness to solve problems and to work towards a really positive business relationship, a positive friendship. You want to be around those.
Core values probably have to be similar, I would think.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
Well, I have just had a wonderful time chatting with you. It's really just great to hear kind of insights when you're building a business like that. I think people just want those nuggets of, it's okay. Kate went through it, and she said she went through dozens and dozens of people before they said yes. And I think that's what people forget. They see the success of someone. They don't realize what they've gone through the 80-90% of the time where they aren't so sure. They've gone through issues. They are like, where am I getting my next dollar? What is this the right decision? Should I stop? Should I not? But it's that persistence of kind of saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to solve this problem. I'm staying with it. This is where I'm in. That has really gotten you through. And so I want to thank you, congratulate you, appreciate you coming on today. Now, if anybody wants more information about Kate, you can find everything you need to know about Kate in the show notes. And until next time, thank you very much. Let me just put this on.